Welcoming to the show today, Brian Tyler Cohen, listed by Don Lemon during our appearance as MAGA's worst nightmare. More of a compliment, really, I would say. Brian, of course, progressive political commentator, YouTuber, podcaster. His new book out Tuesday is Shameless, Republicans' Deliberate Dysfunction and the Battle to Preserve Democracy. So, Brian, before we get into the substance, tell me about your process, because we talked a little bit about this last time I saw you. I was working on my book early in the morning, which I think is just a function of having a kid.
Yeah.
And you talked about 2 a.m. sort of stuff. So just talk a little bit about how long it took you to write this, how much you were writing, your process.
Yeah. So the book I kind of crashed the book because I didn't start writing really until maybe January, and it was due around March. So it was pretty much like a 3-month process. And it was every night, roughly between 10 p.m. when I finally finished working and like 2 a.m. And then I would go to sleep, wake up around 8 the next day. And not the most fun process in the world to finish a full day of work doing what we do. Obviously, there's no shortage of content, but to finish all of that, and then rather than have some semblance of relief because you've just finished your work, you then sit down to write something that's going to be memorialized for the rest of time.
Yeah, without a doubt. So I think, I don't know about you, but I've said, if my book doesn't succeed, and what that means, I don't yet know, I'm probably not writing a second one. But I don't even want to ask you that question yet, because the book's not even out yet. Let's focus on this book for now. And one of the really interesting things you write about in the book is, you talk about on the show and in the book about the hypocrisy that we see from the American right wing. But one of the interesting things that you also mention is that corporate media will often reinforce the double standard that's applied and kind of allow Republicans and the right wing to get away with that double standard rather than to attempt to hold them accountable for it. Talk about how that happens.
The media is so desperate for acceptance from Republicans that what they'll do is basically bend over backwards to overcompensate for their own coverage. And so the media, the last thing they want to do is be called the liberal media, for example. And so in order to prove that they're not the liberal media, because God forbid, they will look at what the Republicans have reported, for example, whether it's Hillary's emails, whether it's the Biden impeachment saga, and they'll make sure to validate that kind of reporting, because if they don't, well, then we, of course, know that Republicans are going to call them the liberal media, and they couldn't possibly have that. And so what we're left with is a right wing that exists to serve as a propaganda arm for Republicans, and a left wing that's there basically bolstering and perpetuating stories that are being promoted by the right. And so we're in this huge asymmetry in our media ecosystem where the right is helping Republicans, the left is bolstering the same propaganda for Republicans, and there's this void on the left. And that's why for so long there's been really no proper coverage of what's happening on the left. It's just again this huge asymmetry that completely benefits the right and leaves the left kind of hanging out to dry.
There's a ton of examples of this, and I've often given the example of on the climate science debate, which I hate to even call it that because I feel like that's even ceding ground to the anti-science right. When you turn on, fill in whatever corporate network, and you see a debate with one person who simply understands and tells us what the science says, and one person who completely ignores what the science says and has a different opinion, and they're put on equal footing. And this is, I think, I've talked about the difference between neutrality and objectivity.
Right.
You can be objective about what we know about the world without having to create the pretense of neutrality, which I think is kind of what you're getting at here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's some perceived obligation to give equal weight to both sides, but the right has learned how to game the refs, and they know that if they say anything, no matter how ridiculous or absurd or baseless or misguided, it'll be given equal deference by the media. And so what we're left with really is them knowing that they can go as extreme as they possibly want. They can push the goalposts all the way into the parking lot if they want to, and still it'll be treated by the media as if it's just as valid as what's happening on the right, with no real concern for the facts surrounding what they just said, or the objectivity of it, or the reality of the situation we're living in. Republicans just know that the media will basically be there to to transcribe what they've said without much pushback, because again, any pushback would be akin to giving deference to the left, and they don't want to be the liberal media. And so just at least, transcribe what they've said and allow the media to be used as a megaphone for what Republicans say, as opposed to doing what they should be doing, which is journalism, which is actually reporting on it. And if somebody says, to your point, something about climate change that isn't real, you don't have to give both sides. You can just say that something is right or wrong.
Yeah. You talk in the book about the advantage that the right has with messaging and branding in some areas. And it must have been like 8 or 10 years ago. I interviewed George Lakoff, and he's written about this quite a bit. And there are some examples where the simplicity of the right's message is a structural advantage. We've talked about, he talked about tax relief, which at its linguistic core means taxes are a burden and getting rid of them is a relief. That kind of puts the left at a disadvantage because our position isn't the opposite, which is, hey, just as many taxes as possible. We want an appropriate level of taxation based to some degree on the needs of the, so it gets more complicated. Talk a little bit about other examples where you find that the right has the branding and messaging advantage.
Well, I think the Trump administration puts that on full display. You look at the simplicity and the repetition of Donald Trump's messaging: make America great again, build the wall, lock her up. I think to his credit, and there's not much I'll give him credit for, but to his credit, he's been very good at basically searing his messages into the cerebral cortexes of his supporters. And I think that there's really something that we can learn from that. And recently, on my channel, I've been doing live streams of all of Kamala Harris's rallies. And people will notice that the beginning of her rallies oftentimes will include a similar iteration of her prosecutor versus felon framing.
Yes.
And they'll ask me in the chat, and they'll say, like, why is she doing the same thing? Why doesn't she change it up? And my pushback to that is, that's a good thing. That shows that Democrats are learning the lessons of repetition. And we should see that and recognize that if we hear the same speech over and over again, that we're not necessarily the target audience for that. We're the ones that are already, if we've watched this multiple times, we're on the team. Our job alongside Kamala Harris is to be able to persuade other Americans who haven't yet heard this speech. And so if she landed on something that's effective, kind of in the same way that Donald Trump landed on something that was effective with build the wall, lock her up, make America great again. If we land on something that's effective, which I would argue prosecutor versus framing absolutely is, then we should recognize that not only is it okay for her to repeat, but we should be encouraging of her repeating her message, because our job alongside her is to reach new people. And so we were initially one of those people who were persuaded by this messaging. And so now we should all be doing the exact same thing and standing alongside her and repeating the same message, because our job is persuasion. And so we have to be able to figure out messaging that works for new people at a rally in Philadelphia, new people at a rally in Atlanta, new people all across the country who are watching this for the first time. So there is a lot to be learned for repetition, but I think the message for my audience, I think for progressive audiences everywhere, is we should embrace repetition. And when we hear it, we should cheer it on, because that means the Democrats are finally learning the really valuable lessons that repetition might hold.
Yeah, I recently spoke with Never Trump Republican Tim Miller, and also spoke with George Conway a little bit about the entire messaging kind of question. And they feel that so far, a lot of the messaging from Trump, Vance, before, but also I would assume even since Tim Walz has been selected, is that it's just not really going to sway anybody who is swayable. In other words, when J.D. Vance gets up there, as he did last week, and talked about Kamala Harris wants to take gas stoves and not allow you to eat red meat. Okay, yeah, I mean, that's been floating around for a while. It sometimes will animate a MAGA rally crowd, but that's not even going to make it into, I hope anyway, knock on wood, any kind of serious corporate media discussion of like, does she want to take your stove? Does she want to take red meat? So I think it goes to what you're pointing to, which is, what is the story that anyone can tell that is not just going to appeal to the base that you already have, but to the voters, probably under 500,000 of them in 3 to 5 key swing states? I don't really know what that message is, but I have an instinct that the positive message we're seeing, like for what we saw last night at the Harris-Walz rally, I hope, Brian, I don't know, but I hope that that will be more influential than Trump's dystopian apocalyptic screeds with the conspiracy music. I don't know, but I hope.
Are you saying that in August of 2024, taking away your gas stoves might not be the thing that pushes those last remaining independent voters and swing voters in battleground states over the finish
Exactly.
line?
I mean, when you put it that way, it's like, are there people sitting around in Wisconsin thinking, I'm not sure who I'm going to vote for, but I'm not going to induction cooktops, so I guess I'm voting Trump? Like, it seems obviously not going to work. I hope.
Yeah. I don't think so either. I also don't think, I actually think they're going in the opposite direction, because you look at the new line of attack that Donald Trump debuted at the National Association of Black Journalists conference, and that was this idea that, in fact, Kamala Harris isn't black, and he was denying her biraciality by pretending, I mean, by straight up playing make-believe that her being half Indian American, half black is not a real thing. And the way that that hurts Donald Trump, especially, not just because most of us can see that he's being a clown, but the people that he really needs to reach out to are people of color and young people. People of color very clearly and obviously understand the concept of biraciality, and young people are inherently the most biracial and diverse generation that we've ever had in this country. Just, I mean, that inherently that's how it works. You can only become more diverse as the generations continue to filter down. So this notion that he's going to be able to make inroads with those communities by attacking the very humanity and background and heritage of Kamala Harris just kind of flies in the face of logic, really. And as for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, I think what they're doing is really smart, because not only are they looking at the opponent in front of them, and that harkens back to the prosecutor versus felon framing, but they're very good about looking forward and even saying outright, acknowledging the reality of what they're doing, and saying it's not just about being anti-Donald Trump, it's about what we can do for you. It's about what the future can hold. It's about a future that has codified abortion rights and reproductive rights and IVF and that's safe for families. It's about a future that protects kids in schools by taking strong action against guns. It's about a future where we can make sure healthcare is more affordable for all Americans, and on and on. They're good about focusing on what the future actually holds. And so in effect, they're basically making this race a referendum on Trump focusing on the past and his own grievances and retaliation efforts versus a forward-looking campaign, which is what Harris and Walz are doing right now. And like, historically, if you look at which works better, the demagoguery might have a few moments in history where it worked, like it did in 2016. But, you know, the campaigns we remember, the campaigns that really exceeded expectations and changed the course of history in this country, were those that were focused on hope. It happened with Barack Obama in 2008. And if you're going to take the Obama hope message and put it against the Trump, you know, demagoguery, hell on earth, World War III message, especially after having gone through it already in 2016, I'd put my money on hope before I would on destruction and chaos.
Yeah, of course, that's the hope. You know, to go back to the biraciality thing, I had this very funny realization in the immediate aftermath of Trump saying she used to be Indian and she became black. I actually talked to my audience seriously about how, you know, there is this question about are Jamaicans considered black or not, and there's different academic definitions. And then afterwards, I realized it's not that they're confused about whether Jamaicans are black or are African American. They're confused about being biracial. Like, my entire discussion assumed that they actually were 1% in good faith questioning whether Jamaicans qualify as this or that, which is a serious academic topic.
Right.
They had no clue. They're just like, how can you be Indian and black? It was like that base and absurd what they were bringing up.
It's like any suggestion that they're doing it because they're not sure about the legitimacy of Jamaicans being considered black is assuming that is giving them too much credit already.
Yes.
That's already 10 steps ahead of where they are. They just can't understand the very basic or refuse to understand the very basic concept of what it is. And that's also assuming that they're not just doing this for an even more pernicious reason, which is to try and paint Kamala Harris as not black, because Trump knows that his goal here has to be to reach out to people of color and young people. And so by trying to create a wedge between her and that community, he thinks he's going to help himself. But in fact, he just looks like a racist old white guy.
So, last thing I want to talk to you about is what you see as the role of progressive independent media going forward here. You and I have had a lot of conversations off air about how we are feeling about what's happening politically, with the understanding that we're always going to our audiences and just giving our opinions. Like sometimes people will write to me and go, David, you crafted your opinion in order to give X or Y impression. And what I've always done, and as far as I know, what you have always done, is what you publicly say is just what you actually believe at the time. There's no like character that you're playing in this sort of thing.
Right.
And so my views, for example, on Biden and ultimately stepping down shifted over time as I received more information. And we are now where we are. And I'm trying to make the best effort to inform my audience about what's the best path forward. I don't want progressive independent media to become, to use a pejorative term, blue MAGA or any of others. I want it to be a place where there is critical thinking and we're evaluating our choices and making the best ones. How do we keep it at that in the environment that's building as our platforms grow?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's easy in a lot of times to kind of bend to the whims of the majority of the audience, and if they want if they're looking for a certain answer, if they want us to act a certain way, I think there is a lot of pressure for us to do that, especially because we're immediately responsive to our audiences, right? Like we have the gift and the curse of being able to see, for example, instant feedback. And so if people are mad about something, they're going to let us know, and we're going to feel it a hell of a lot more than somebody's going to feel it on legacy media when they, do their thing into a camera, pack up their stuff, go home, watch TV later, and maybe open a few emails, or probably not. So there is that pressure on us. But I think our job really, look, the authenticity is going to show. That's presumably why you and I got to the point that we're at, where we're able to reach as many people as we're lucky enough to be able to reach. But I think if the authenticity starts to give way to some expectation that we have to perform a certain way, then the audience will be able to feel that. I mean, the benefit of what we do is we just get to be real on camera and give our real thoughts on everything. And so while there might be that pressure, look, at the end of the day, like, again, it's going to be a question of authenticity versus performative nature. And so you just gotta do whatever you can to make sure that you're authentic, because it's going to shine through. And you're going to have, if you lie about one thing and the lies kind of like stack on top of other lies, it's going to be a house of cards that you're not going to be able to maintain for too long. So that's our job, is to just keep being authentic. And there's plenty of people who will call us out on our bullshit if we're not. Again, the curse and the blessing of being an independent media figure who's directly responsible to people who can comment and email and leave messages and basically reach us in any one of a million different ways.
Yeah, blessing and curse sounds about right in terms of the repercussions.
Yeah,
listen,
it is funny because like I'll look at my inbox sometimes, and to your point about blessing and curse, I'll look at my inbox and I'll just see one email after the next, and you just get whiplash seeing what people have to say. Like someone will say the worst thing that you've ever heard a human say to another human, and the next thing is like, "I love your show. Thank you so much for what you do." So.
Not only that, I mean, any interview I do, I just did a panel with Mike Pillow and then an actual voter fraud expert. I got emails saying this is absolutely the best thing that you've ever done. And also this was a complete waste of 35 minutes. Please never do it again. I mean, I think the point is there's hopefully a little something for everyone. If they don't like me, and many of them don't, maybe they like you, or maybe they like somebody else.
Yeah. Well, I've maintained to my audience that the work that you do, you are a massive inspiration in terms of why I came onto YouTube. I think that you're the best in the business, and that your audience is lucky to be able to have your perspective on your channel. So I would just extend to your audience that it doesn't get better than what David does.
Well, thank you so much, and you're out there killing it, and so are so many others. So listen, let me tell you once again, Tuesday, the book is out. Not my book. I'm talking about Brian's book. It's called Shameless: Republicans' Deliberate Dysfunction and the Battle to Preserve Democracy. We're linking to the book so you can get it. And it's also available in audio, in audio, written, and also ebook form, really everywhere that one would expect to find such things, I think is fair to say.
Yeah, it's available everywhere. If you want, if you get your books on Amazon or Barnes and Noble, or even if you want to support independent booksellers, you can go to bookshop.org. That's
Yes.
a great one to support indie shops, and would very much appreciate it, especially considering a certain hillbilly elegy is on the rise, and so I would just love to not be upstaged by J.D. Vance's book.
No, that would be a real shame, as Donald
Yeah,
Trump often says. Brian, really appreciate having you on. Thanks.
David, thanks so much, man.